Hello everybody, my name is Robius and welcome to a new episode of Assassin's Creed: The Real History. In this series, I compare events in a selected character's life within one of the Assassin's Creed games to the actual history the individual lived through. As always, beware of major story spoilers. For today's episode, we will be taking a look at the history of the Continental Army soldier, Thomas Hickey. As is customary, I'll begin this episode by sharing with you his pre-game history, which will inform us on his background prior to AC3, then his in-game history, which we see depicted in the game, and lastly we will analyze the differences between what happens in the game to the real historical events of the individual's life. Starting with the pre-game history, it should first be noted that very little 100% factual information exists concerning Thomas Hickey's life. For instance, even his place of birth is not fully confirmed, although it is accepted by some sources that he may have been born in Ireland. It is then believed that he may have joined the British Army prior to coming to the New World, although it is possible that he could have enlisted himself only after arriving. In truth, it can only be certainly confirmed that he did eventually join the Continental Army following its creation in 1775. Some of the first official records of Thomas Hickey's history could also be considered the point in his life where we first met the man in Assassin's Creed 3 as Connor. However, he did have an in-game presence prior to that moment, both during Connor's childhood and Haytham's arrival in the New World, despite the majority of it being fictional. Historically, at this point there are debates on Hickey's exact military rank, but it is generally considered that he was either a private or a sergeant within the Commander-in-Chief's Guard, a special unit of soldiers created in 1776 with the purpose of defending George Washington, all of the important documents that he sent and received, and the funds of the Continental Army. Despite being a member of this important unit, also referred to as Washington's Lifeguard, Thomas and another soldier were arrested for the crime of passing counterfeit money. This part was well shown in AC3 when Connor, who was attempting to kill Hickey, interrupted his operation and was later arrested alongside the man for the crime.
You are both under arrest! Oh, well, we were just having a scrap, officer. Ain't nothing wrong with two men settling their differences the old-fashioned way. Can't we come to a...
Quiet! What are the charges?
Counterfeiting!
I had nothing to do with that.
Of course not!
Listen, there are more important things at stake here. This man is planning to...
During his imprisonment, there are accounts that state that Hickey explained to another prisoner, Isaac Ketchum, that he was a member of an even larger conspiracy. This claim was supposedly bolstered by the fact that multiple other soldiers were involved, and that the endgame was to defect to the British once they invaded New York. Although this should be considered the only fully confirmed information which was shared, many other stories claim that Hickey's admission included even larger crimes. The first of these demonstrated that along with the Tories, they would attempt to secure the King's Bridge, which served as an important land route from Manhattan, and then either capture or destroy the storage depots of the Continental Army located in the Hudson Highlands and in the Westchester County. The reason this would have been deadly was because it would have essentially trapped the Continental Army on Manhattan until the British arrived. The second supposed conspiracy was to kidnap the Commander-in-Chief, George Washington, and to either capture or kill as many of his personal guards as possible. Evidently, this would have been a colossal blow to the Patriots' morale and military planning had it been put into effect and succeeded. Lastly, the third plot would have simply been to kill George Washington, or possibly to poison him, which once again would have had massive repercussions. This final plot was the one indicated in Assassin's Creed 3, although it should be noted that it wasn't necessarily factual. Despite these plots being unconfirmed, they existed both as rumors and as possible scenarios, which are still discussed by some historians to this day. Unfortunately for Thomas, though, when he was apparently discussing his plans to defect to the British, certain civilians who supported the Patriots learned of the conspiracy and informed the correct authorities so that Hickey would be arrested and later turned over to the Continental Army to be tried. Following his trial, Thomas Hickey was court-martialed and found guilty of the crimes of sedition and mutiny. At his trial, certain documents state that Hickey claimed that his sole crime was being involved in the counterfeiting of money and that he only had the intention of defecting to the British in a last-ditch effort to survive. Evidently, these arguments were not found valid by the court. For this reason, he was publicly hanged in front of a crowd of 20,000 spectators in the city of New York on June 28, 1776. Certain records even claim that it was by George Washington's will that so many people were present, so that an example would be made of traitors, as Thomas Hickey was the first person executed for treason against what would eventually become the United States. This was clearly different than his death in AC3, which was at the hands of Connor during the assassin's own fictional execution. Lastly, I wanted to clarify that the reason for which his military rank was ambiguous was since certain records indicate him as being a sergeant, despite him being referred to as a private during his trial in other records. The reasoning shown by certain sources is that he was demoted prior to his trial, as was done to many convicted criminals who were in military service. In summary, since there are very limited records on Hickey's death, there were a few differences between his actual life and his representation in Assassin's Creed 3. Firstly, the entire account of his experiences with Haytham Kenway and his participation in the Templars' actions during the French and Indian War and beyond were fictionalized, as there was no fully factual record of his life during this period. Secondly, although certain rumors existed that Hickey may have possibly been involved in a conspiracy that could have had the goal to take George Washington's life, among other things, there is no official record of such a case. Thirdly, Hickey was not killed during the fictional trial of Connor by the young assassin, but was instead executed for the crime of treason. However, aside from these differences, Hickey's famed treason and his participation in counterfeiting money were very well represented in AC3 and made for an extremely interesting segment of the story. His behavior and general single-mindedness for money were a wonderful interpretation of his historical persona. And with that final fact, we have finished another episode of Assassin's Creed: The Real History. I hope you all enjoyed the video, and if you did, I highly recommend you try out one of the Assassin's Creed games. Thank you all for watching. Please leave any suggestions for future characters from any of the Assassin's Creed games that you'd like me to cover in the comment section below. Please rate, comment, and subscribe, and I will see you all in a future historical episode.
They paid me, so I said yes. Didn't bother to ask who, or how, or why. Didn't care.